22 years after Dan Didio ran DC into the ground because he had no publishing experience, Marvel goes out here and hires two entertainment executives to do the exact same thing. Sad. Just sad. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. Esteem a New Woman. The devilish diva starts on the road to becoming a new creature in Christ in this all-new Esteem series adventure. Get your copy of Esteem a New Woman at Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, because we're having us a barbecue. Marvel Comics Publishing Division is getting a shakeup. The head of Marvel Comics Publishing, Dan Buckley, is leaving Marvel Comics in 2027, and Marvel Comics is looking to promote Brad Winderbaum, already its chief of television and animation, to head Marvel Comics animation, comics, and franchise, and is looking to promote David Abdo, who works in Disney's music division, to serve as general manager of comics and franchise. Now, this set of promotions are really quite troubling to me as someone who works in the publishing industry, because you have two people who are used to working in television and music heading Marvel Comics Publishing Division. And when I heard about this announcement, it really took me back to 2002 and the promotion of Dan Didio to the head of DC Comics after Jeanette Kahn decided to retire and Paul Levitz basically left. And many people at Warner Brothers at the time thought Dan Didio would be a good fit for the job of editor-in-chief and president of DC Comics, because he was coming from an entertainment background. However, that decision proved to be a complete disaster as DC Comics went into a complete sales decline under Dan Didio's leadership. Now, Dan Didio, when he was working at DC, basically had no publishing experience and had no understanding of how to run a comic publishing house. And because he came from Hollywood, he thought he could go out here and use shocking events to generate sales in stories like Graduation Day and Identity Crisis and Infinite Crisis, filled with lots of death and violence. And as a result, this wound up alienating many DC fans and led to DC Comics going into a free fall as related to sales that they never really got out of, especially once they ended the post-crisis DC universe and we entered into the era of the New 52. And the same thing could possibly happen as related to Marvel Comics, which has already been struggling for the last couple of years after complete failed campaigns like the all-new, all-different Marvel. And it's clear to me that this is not a good decision, because what Marvel and DC need, as I see it, is really they need somebody running those companies who has real publishing experience, and that's what both companies have lacked, and that's why Marvel and DC have basically been struggling in sales compared to Japanese manga and manga from other Asian countries. The reason why both Marvel and DC are struggling is because both publishing houses really don't have that publishing professional in place to basically set a direction for them as a publisher. And as a result, what's happened at Marvel is that they have basically been in a vicious cycle of reboots for the last 30 years, and that whole situation has gotten exacerbated because what happens is that these days the books barely go 6 to 8 issues before they're canceled and rebooted, and that's because Marvel doesn't have that publishing pro to go out here and create standards for Marvel, like a house style as related to the art and the storytelling, or set a direction for Marvel books the way the late Jim Shooter did when he was in charge from 1978 to 1987. Now, when Jim Shooter was in charge, he basically had years of publishing experience ever since he was a teenager, working under professionals like Mort Weisinger at DC Comics, and then working under publishing pros at Marvel to learn the business of publishing. And as he learned the business of publishing, he learned about what makes a comic book sell. And because Shooter knew how to sell comics, he was able to take Marvel in a direction where Marvel went from being the number 2 comic company to DC Comics to eventually selling more comics than any comic company in the 1980s, and basically turned many comics into top brands. Books that were basically struggling before he came there, like Daredevil, Iron Man, X-Men, and The Incredible Hulk, he eventually turned them into bestsellers, all because he knew how the publishing business worked as related to comics and knew how to run a publishing house by establishing standards like house style for Marvel stories, because a Marvel story under Shooter was very unique and distinct, and house style as related to art, because the art under Shooter was always consistent from book to book. Every character basically looked the same from book to book. Didn't matter what artist came in until about 1988 or so, when Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee came in. Usually every character followed a house style as related to model, and that made all the books consistent, and that made it where customers could easily go out here and access Marvel Comics, because under Shooter, every book was an entry point, because he understood the business of comics and publishing, that the books needed to be accessible. But these days, when it comes to Marvel, the entire Marvel universe is a jumbled mess, and them not having that publishing pro in place is basically making things worse, because Disney, as they've bought Marvel, basically have not put that publishing professional in place. And what's happened is now that you've got Dan Buckley leaving, and you're getting 2 guys who are basically, one is coming from music, which basically is just, this is out of his whole job description. And you've got another guy coming from television, animation, and comics and franchise. Again, this is not his wheelhouse. And you need someone who comes from publishing in order to get Marvel's house in order. You need someone who can come into Marvel and get that house in order, because currently CB Cebulski has basically turned Marvel into a jumbled mess, because he doesn't understand comics whatsoever. You got books getting canceled and rebooted at a rapid pace, keeping readers from being able to come in. And now you've got 2 guys from television and animation coming in, and I don't see the situation getting better for Marvel. In fact, I see it getting even worse than it was under Dan Didio, because you really need a publishing professional to get the creative standards in order. You need an editor-in-chief who understands publishing to get the creative standards in order, and you need someone who can advocate for artists and creatives to get the pay scale up. That was one of the things that Shooter went out here and did, get the pay scale up, because Marvel currently these days is paying many creators pennies on the dollar. $50 a page for a writer, $50 a page for an artist. I mean, these rates are reprehensible when you consider that Marvel is a subsidiary of Disney, that's a $1 billion company, that you're paying writers and artists basically less than minimum wage for pages of art and pages of story. And Marvel really, again, has the wrong people in charge. And this is an even worse decision than Disney's new CEO, basically showing me how lost Disney is as related to going out here and publishing comics. Again, the first person you need to be looking for at Marvel is somebody, again, with that publishing experience, who can go out here and get Marvel back into being a competitive company. And this is not the guy, I believe, to be that guy. You need a publishing professional who can go out here and, again, not only set those standards for, again, house style and as writing and art, you also need somebody who can go out here and get this catalog in order so that you have a core 16 books, so that people can go out here and buy most of the Marvel titles for under $100 bill. And you need to go out, and Marvel really needs someone who understands the publishing business so that you're not launching books randomly or just having multiple volumes of books. They need that publishing pro to get Marvel's house in order. But sadly, these two guys, again, coming from television and music, wouldn't know what to do to get Marvel's house in order. They're coming from different areas and don't understand the publishing business, don't understand how 90% of books fail, and that's even in a good market. And you have to be very careful about the books that you launch, because Marvel's current editorial people, ever since Joe Quesada, have not been careful. They've just been burning through money as related to trying to maintain the trademarks at Marvel, but they're not creating any sort of good cohesive stories that you can use for other material. And that's another thing that Disney doesn't understand. If your publishing division isn't run by publishing pros, you're not going to be able to get the stories that you need to adapt into movies or TV shows or animated series. You're not going to be able to get that if you don't have a good editor-in-chief in charge to basically go out here and check all of the bad ideas and terrible stories. I mean, that's what Jim Shooter used to do. He basically was out here maintaining the quality of the house because he understood that if the stories coming out of the house are good, then you're going to be able to have material to adapt. But I'm looking at who they're promoting over at Disney, and this is not a good sign for Marvel. Nope, not a good sign for Marvel when you get a guy whose wheelhouse is television and animation as the head of Marvel's publishing, and a guy whose wheelhouse is music. He's going to be, again, working up under this guy. This is a disaster waiting to happen, a disaster worse than Dan Didio, and a disaster worse than Dan Didio because, again, in order to be publish comics, you need a publishing professional who has a passion for comics, has an understanding of the business, and understands how to sell comics and how comics are sold. And sadly, we don't have that with these two guys. And what I see happening at Marvel is Marvel being in a worse place where they're going to lose even more market share to DC and will lose even more market share to manga, because when you have a publishing house needs to be run by publishing professionals who know how the business of selling books works, because books are the hardest thing to sell, and you need somebody who understands how books sell in order to reach those readers and reach that new generation of readers with comics that you would appeal to them. Now, my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, is available on Lulu.com in paperback, and you can get the Kindle version on Amazon.com right now. And my other comic, Esteem No Good Deed, is available on Kindle for just 99 cents, and you can also pick it up in the Esteem series book, Esteem Blast from the Past. And I would like to, again, go out here and continue to keep real artists hired by putting their work on the cover of my books. So if you guys want to help me out, you can go out here and drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App. And I use that money to go out here and pay artists to do the covers of my books, because comics were the way I learned how to read, and comics basically are something I'm very passionate about. And one day I would like to do the ISIS graphic novel to go along with the Esteem and John Haynes story, and I would love to do comics on the regular, but I can't do that without your donations. So if you guys could drop those donations, it would be greatly appreciated. And again, that's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS Runway of Doom. The goddess next door struts her stuff on the catwalk to take on a runway of rogues in this action-packed all-new ISIS series adventure. Get your copy of ISIS Runway of Doom at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, An Offer He Can't Refuse. The man who rules the world gets a job offer he can't refuse in this action-packed all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes, An Offer He Can't Refuse at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.